All right, like you heard, my name is Cassandra McLaughlin. I'm a pre-vet biology major at Gannon University, and I did this research with Dr. Stephen Ropsky, who is a biology professor also at Gannon University. So this whole story starts off quite interesting. I was working on trying to find myself a good research opportunity in the Erie area, and I was really looking at the Erie Zoo originally. But due to COVID restrictions, I wasn't able to do any research there at that time. So I got in contact with Dr. Ropsky, and I said, I'm really having a predicament here, and I need some help. Do you have any ideas? I get an email right back, maybe about 5 minutes later, and he goes, well, you'll never believe this, but I have a great opportunity. I was like, okay, cool. So I give him a call, and he goes, well, I was weeding on top of Nash Library's green roof, which originally I didn't even know was there. I hadn't been up there yet. So this was news to me, and he would have been weeding right over here on top of Nash Library. And he goes, only about 2 feet behind me was this mallard nested right within the sedum. You couldn't see her. He'd been up there quite a few times, towards the beginning of summer. And this is when we found, just a side note, her name is Willie, so I'll be referencing to her as Willie. And like I said, she was only about 2 feet behind Dr. Ropsky, so he was pretty much almost sitting on her while he's weeding this green roof. And as you can see, our green roof doesn't have any water. You've heard a bit about it. We don't have any water on top of this green roof. We're 3 stories up in the air, and the green roof itself is only 4 years old. So just the fact that Willie took notice of this green space as a safe area to nest was really interesting to us, especially the fact that she can see everybody and everybody can see her. It's a little bit of an interesting area from a behavioral standpoint, and also looking at where ducks would normally be nesting, which would be near water and low to the ground. Willie likes the opposite. Alrighty, and then also another thing to note about our green roof is that it is pans, just because our roof is non-weight bearing, like most of our green roofs in the area, as you've heard about prior to this. So this would be on May 3rd. Yes. So May 3rd was the first day I got set up. The day that we actually noticed that Willie was there, I'm sorry, not May, June 3rd, May 23rd is when we noticed that Willie was there. And then May 24th, we had actually heard that there were no eggs in the nest, or that there was a potential for there not to be eggs in the nest. And we just had actually heard about that from our library staff, who play a very large role in this project. But I rushed over there on June 3rd, and this was our first day setup. So we started right away with getting cameras going. And this is actually a GoPro stand. You can see over here that that's right where Willie's at. So we're just trying to see, what movement can we see? What behaviors is she exhibiting? Is she showing us signs of sitting on eggs? And so on. So this is really, like I said up here, a race against the clock. We don't know if she has eggs. We don't know if she's leaving the nest. And we're trying to figure out, why is she here? So we get our 3 camera varieties that we worked with for a majority of this time period. So we had the GoPro originally, which unfortunately its battery didn't last as long as we would have liked. So we moved on to our next options, which would have been the CASA surveillance camera. So it's like a home surveillance camera where you'd be able to see everything 24/7. Unfortunately, that only worked for a little while, so our best bet right here was our Reconyx trail cameras, which we actually sat out on the green roof in a very stealthy way, and we'll see those pictures coming up here as well. And aside from just our cameras and looking at all of the information that we were gaining from that way, we were also working, Dr. Ropsky and I, for an hour from 2 to 3 o'clock every day. And then we also had, like I said, they'd come into play, the wonderful library staff that was there during the summer. So from 8:30 a.m. until 5:30 p.m., beginning on June 9th, is when our library staff would go on top of the Nash Library and take a look at Willie and see if she was leaving the nest, which noted on all of their time charts is that she never left the nest. And we were really trying to figure out, is she still leaving to get energy to take care of her young? Turns out that she wasn't, based off of their observations and also our cameras, and also what Dr. Ropsky and I were collecting daily while we were there watching her. So right here you see, this was our first documented egg sighting, officially, where either Dr. Ropsky or myself had finally said, yes, there are confirmed eggs in there. And we could only see about 2 or 3 eggs. And from that point on, we knew that mother ducks typically sit on a nest for 25 to 29 days. So we didn't know how much time we had from this point onward until hopefully the babies would hatch. And then here, while we were working on trying to figure out when these young would finally hatch, we were also looking at the behaviors of Willie. And this was one that was really interesting for us. Not only was she exhibiting a panting behavior, which is when her beak would open and close very slowly. She was trying, it was very hot up there, so she was still trying to make sure that her temperature was okay. But right here is actually what we were calling at the time chattering. But with later research, we found out that that was actually vocalization. So the mother ducks will do this in order so that their young can hear their voice, learn it, and then also toward later stages of development begin to vocalize back to the mother. And this will also later on help them synchronize when they will all hatch. So that's a very interesting part of this whole thing as well. So back to the trail cams. This was much closer to the most important part of this whole thing. But this is our Reconnect trail cams, and we put them on the roof beginning on June 11th, and they remained on the roof for 8 days, and they were on day and night, so they have night vision. We would be able to see if she was leaving the nest or not. And as you can see, we have some friends who would visit us. There was about almost 300 pictures of our pigeons and other random movements, but no Willie, and you would have seen her. She would have flown up from about right there, or if she was even looking around the green roof in general for food or water. So on Father's Day, we had the unexpected hatching. This was, this was much shorter time frame than we were expecting to work with. Luckily, Dr. Ropsky took time out of his day with his family on Father's Day to go and check on Miss Willie. And wouldn't you know it, a baby pops out from under Willie. We have ducklings. And of course, I get a call, and I can't remember where I was at, but anytime he called me, I knew something was going on. He goes, Casey, tomorrow we've got to make sure we get these babies off the roof. And that was actually another issue we encountered was, do we let nature play its course, or do we take action and get the babies off the roof? Because you have to remember, they're 3 stories off the ground, and they don't have water, which is essential to their first couple of days on this earth, and we want to make sure that that worked out all right. So on June 21st is when, the day right after the babies hatched, is when we got together with Wildlife in Need in order to get Willie off the roof. And we also had a great community effort from the Gannon students as well. Some people just that we needed to be there because we didn't know how many babies we were dealing with or how Willie was going to react to us trying to relocate the babies. So here she is looking a little more rough than she normally does. You can tell that her feathers are ruffled out. She's really just trying to keep the babies close to her. She was used to us being there, which made it a little bit easier as far as getting the babies. But it was still an uphill battle. So we ended up seeing that there were 5 babies that had actually hatched. And the reason she's walking around now is because our Wildlife in Need experts were coming onto the roof to try and fence in the area around her. Unfortunately, Willie is very smart, so she began to try and find a way off of the roof or a way away from the people who were trying to get close to her young. And right here, is when we finally caught Willie and the babies. And you see our Wildlife in Need expert right there. And then also, that is Gina in the tie-dye. She is where the babies and Willie eventually ended up for their rehabilitation period. So another important thing that happened was that we actually had to put Willie and the babies in 2 separate cages so that there weren't any injuries of Willie herself and then also the young, because they are very fragile at this point in time. All right, and you see you're getting her in there. And then right after this, you'll see them collecting the eggs from Willie's nest. And before they began to collect the eggs, our experts here were actually listening down into the ground to see if they could hear any vocalizations coming from the eggs so that they knew what they were going to be dealing with as soon as they got Willie rehomed. And they're going ahead and putting them in the box with the sheet after they have decided that they haven't heard anything coming from them, but they're still going to bring them with, as well as the pieces of the nest that they're actually able to pick up and put in the box. This will allow Willie a little bit more time to try and incubate these eggs and get them to hatch. But at this point, it is a little bit too late. And then next, finally, this was the most relieving part, is when we finally got them off the roof. And one thing I did forget to mention is that while they were actually on the roof trying to catch these guys, Dr. Ropsky and I had come down all these stairs. This isn't the first time we'd been down these stairs today. We'd rushed down these stairs with 2 bed sheets, just in case the babies were to fall off the side of the building. So we had little parachutes and all of that. And you see us, we're just getting to the Wildlife in Need vehicle at this point in time. But once Willie and the babies were taken by Gina, they had actually gone to Northeast to live with her. She works with multiple different birds. That's her specialty. She works with wild birds and waterfowl and things like that. So they would actually remain with Gina until late August. Unfortunately, during this time period, Willie did manage to escape. When the babies were a little bit older, when the ducklings were a little bit older, she had actually figured out that when the volunteers would turn away to get water for her, they would leave the cage unlatched. It was closed, but unlatched. And she would actually back herself up to the back of the cage, and she rammed it and flew out. The babies tried to follow her. Unfortunately, they didn't know how to fly yet. But all 5 babies ended up being all right. Unfortunately, like I said, there were only 5 babies, which meant those other eggs did not hatch. And what she did at that point in time when she realized they weren't vocalizing back to her is she had actually smashed the eggs and ate them to take back that energy that she had allocated into their development at the beginning of her incubating them. So here's the final part. This is kind of the sweet ending to the story, is that all 5 babies were released on August 31st in Union City. And you will notice that there's 6 of them here. That is because there's another orphaned duck here, not of the same little brood that was there before. And then I did skip a picture, but they're actually in an area with multiple other ducks to be able to teach them teach them their reins. Here's how we get a grip on the wild. And then I just want to give a big thank you to Janet Laboda, who is the library staff that I alluded to. She was the main lady in charge of all of those time charts, and then with the other Gannon employees there to help out with us. Sue with WIN, which is the Wildlife in Need for the capture and rehabilitation. Gina, as I mentioned, was their caretaker until the release. Austin Froelich for the photos and video content, probably about 90 or more % of it. And then also Sarah Till, who helped us get a lot of things together, whether Dr. Ropsky and I couldn't be there on a given day. We made sure that things were taken care of. But are there any questions after all that?
Were they all female, or hadn't those ducks just developed their
They did end up developing as all female, and I'm not sure if that had anything to do with the conditions that they were under, but all the ducklings ended up being female. Yep.
sisters?
Any other questions? Oh, yes. Did you put a tag on Willie?
We did not, and that's actually something I forgot to mention. I'm going to put this note down. Okay. We are actually very excited to see if she'll come back next year. You never know. To see maybe will she return to nest where she was at, or was she too disturbed after we removed her? We're not sure, but I wish we had tagged her.
So when I call a game commission, I said, we have a duck in our roof, do you want to come and do stuff? They said, we let nature take its course.
Yep.
So they did not even want to come and mark or tag it, and I can't tag ducks, so I understand. So we're curious to see if Willie comes back next year. So was this a successful nest? I don't know, in her mind, maybe, in our mind, I don't know, we'll see.
I'd say she got 5 babies. It was good.
So how long was she up there without leaving?
So she was up there from June 3rd, that we know of, which would have been our first day, kind of getting our cameras ready,
Yeah.
all the way until June 21st.
21st, okay.
Yep,
That's a
from
long time.
till the day that we moved her. So she hadn't moved at all, and that was our main thing: is she gonna move off this nest? Are we gonna see if she's still leaving to get resources for herself? And no, once they go into that brooding stage, they don't move. They stake it out. Yep.
Okay.
So the conditions on the top of the roof, were they much warmer or hotter? She seemed very exposed
Yes.
compared to like a typical nesting site that they would select.
Right, there was a little overhang, but we actually think that she picked this area just because of, it seemed secluded to her, so there was the walls and everything, and like I said before, we were noticing a panting behavior coming from her, because a lot of these days were over 80 and sunny, as I had noted in all of my journals, but that's why she was panting and all that, but
I just want to point out that when you showed that video with her panting, I could see bugs zipping by.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
she's like a colony with her mouth open.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Okay, right.
Follow up to the time frame that she was on the roof. So during that period while she's nesting, does she need to intake food or water, or does she basically just survive?
no, normally if she would have been a little bit earlier on, she may have still been collecting resources in order to sustain herself and then also sustain her energy to be able to incubate the eggs. But typically when they're, later in their incubation process or brooding process, they've already collected enough energy to be able to allocate more toward reproduction. So, yeah.
Thank you very
Yep,
much.
of course, thank you.